Yeah. Especially dark.
Yeah, like. Yes, Donna's gonna start. So I'm gonna introduce Donna. I am Laura Christensen, the director of the Thomas Balch Library, and I'm very pleased and excited to welcome you all today for our program, Spatializing Black Stories. And specifically, I'd like to welcome our partners who are presenting the program today, the Black History Committee and our George Mason University partners. To do a much better introduction, I'm going to introduce Shemika, the chair of the Black History Committee. But quickly, just know this program is being recorded by Thomas Balch Library, so there is audio going on. If you need any facilities while you're here, the restrooms are behind the room. The water fountain is to the left. And we hope that after the program today, if there's time, you'll stop by and enjoy the library and the reading room, and you just know that you're welcome to explore. So turn it on over to Donna Buchanan.
So elders in the room, may I start the program? Yes. Thank you. So welcome. I'm Donna Bohannon, and I chair the Black History Committee. And in this role, I facilitate the committee's mission to collect, preserve, and share the Black history of Loudoun County, Virginia. I also have the pleasure to work with a community of members who are leaders in their own rights and passionate about preserving African American history respectfully and intentionally. So I have an observation. So it's clear to me in 2024 that it's not just that we should be proud of our brilliant cultural heritage, but also be intentional about how we present it. So I am of African descent. And for example, I started this portion of the program using an African cultural tradition, recognizing the elders in the room. So thank you for allowing me to speak and start the program. Another cultural African tradition is acknowledging the ancestors. So the St. Louis portion of today's program is possible because of the work of a descendant of one of the families that established that community in the 1800s. He was determined to have his beloved community's stories preserved and shared under threat of encroaching development. His name is Marcus Howard. Marcus is now an ancestor. Today we acknowledge, recognize, and thank Marcus for his vision, dedication to the St. Louis story, and also, again, we dedicate this portion or that portion of this program to them. Now, even though Marcus is no longer with us in the flesh, that baton was passed on and picked up by Laverne, Tootie, Warner. So thank you, Tootie, for your leadership in working with all of us. The community of Willard. Local historian, Louis Jack, has been steadfast in keeping Willard alive in our minds by sharing his research and memories about the community where he once lived. Thank you, Louis. We dedicate the Willard portion of this program to you. And you will hear from Lewis a little later in the program. So recognition, gratitude, and community building. That's one of the tenets of African culture. And so what I'd like to do is also tell you about our community supporters. We receive grants from the African American Community Alliance and the Van Hype Shockley Family Foundation in order to do the work of the research and working with the George Mason University Center for Mason Legacies. Also, I would like to recognize Supervisor Karan Sains for his efforts to have the Willard story recognized. Also, members of the Black History Committee's Preservation Equity Initiative, who have worked over the past 4 years or so in order to identify places and stories of Loudoun's Black communities. So finally, it's one thing to collect stories and conduct research about places and people. It's quite another to tell and present that information with cultural competence, intelligence, and heart. And with the intention to honor the descendant communities. So the Black History Committee, Thomas Balch Library, we're fortunate to have found that level of cultural competence in our partnership with the faculty and students of George Mason University Center for Mason Legacies, Dr. Wendi, Manuel-Scott, Dr. George Oberle, and students, researchers, digital exhibit creators, Shemika, Curvey, and Annabelle Spencer. That's it. Over to you.
So, hi, I'm George Oberle. I have the best job in the world because I am both a librarian and a teacher, and I get to work with incredibly smart people, like my dear friend Wendi, and my incredibly good friends and colleagues, Shemika and Annabelle. The one thing I do want to say is that what Wendi and I and our colleague Benedict Carton, what we really want to help our students learn are a couple of things. One, a thing that we learned from our mentors, such as Larry Levine and other amazing scholars, who's taught us first that history is always produced. And understanding that that production makes choices within the context of that. And then the second thing, and this is really important to me as a historian and a librarian, is that archives as well are produced in terms of whose stories are going to be saved and privileged. And so it's critical that the work that we have started to do, for us to acknowledge that community members have been doing this work for years. Archivists have, both community and professionals, have been making the materials available through their collections of materials and their expertise that allowed us to kind of help students learn that this production is important and that there's a plethora of sources out there. That's the thing that's stunning, right? This thing that's stunning is it's not a paucity of resources available that document the Black community. There's a lot out there. People have chosen not to answer or look for these questions. And our work, it's a pleasure for our work to be focused on this.
Yes, and that is the title of this research and the presentation that you're going to hear from our incredible students. Spatializing Black stories. Often when we think about Black history, we think, oh, an individual, right? A person. But what we have learned, right, along with our students, is that Black folk make meaning in place, right? We think about a community, it's about people coming together and making that location, making that place matter. And sometimes, while they're making that place matter, there are other people that are making their lives, right, the choices that they make, the ability to protect their family difficult. And so our work as historians and working with our students is not to tell a story of people just oppressed, right? But to tell a story of people who resist, people who thrive, people who collectively, right, invest in the next generation. And so spatializing Black stories is about the Black geographies here in Loudoun County, the contributions of African-American men, women, and children, and of communities. And so we are very excited for you to have the opportunity to learn and to see what the students have discovered. And this is an ongoing research journey. Today is not the end. It really just marks an unfolding beginning, and all of us get to be a witness to that. So thank you for your presence.
Okay, so hi everyone. I am the Annabelle half of this group. I'm gonna kind of restate a little bit of what people have said already, but as everybody knows, we're presenting Willard and St. Louis as representative examples of some other enclaves in this area. They're not entirely representative, right? But they can tell us a piece of this broader Loudoun County history. Just to name a few other places that where I'm referencing are Arcola, Conklin, Mount Pleasant. There are so many more. And like Dr. Wendi was saying, we are spatializing stories, right? And we're interested in geography and space, but really it's the people inside the space. And so we might use the word placemaking, either in this presentation or in our longer narrative, which we'll share with you at the end. And what we mean by that is the endowing of meaning at a location, right? So, for example, you might have a space that is a plot of land that you bought. And so by purchasing it, building a home on it, passing that home to your children, you've turned a geography into an heirloom and into generational wealth. And it is a place rather than just a space, just a geography. Yeah, so we're spatializing these stories to reveal how the individuals who lived in Willard and in St. Louis gave meaning to space in that way and in other ways. They claimed space and they fought to retain it. And by centering these family histories is what we're really doing. And by doing that, we found some really deep and amazing connections, and patterns became visible. The families of these two communities, more than 100 years, created strategies with which to secure property rights against all odds, right? Navigating intentionally opaque systems of law. They leveraged occupational expertise to find pathways to financial freedom and family freedom. And then above all, they prioritized the establishment of interdependent communities of care that sometimes crossed family names and crossed households. They extended beyond those biological boundaries. And like everyone has said before, this history has been husbanded by some of you all in this room and many others for generations. And so what we are aiming to do is placing these collections and these passions in context with some new findings, and we're stitching together these pieces of history that have never been told as one. It's also, so full attributions of these contributions and sourcing and all of that kind of stuff will be available in the written narrative that, like I said, we're going to share at the end. So don't worry about that. There's lots to go through. But yeah, we're going to go ahead and start with Willard. And I'm sure many of you know this is a place that was removed in order to build Dulles Airport. This is not a place we can really go and visit anymore. This background is the 1906 post office map, and you can see here that Willard is marked. And this is significant for two reasons. One, because getting a post office, right, meant increased access to communication and joining this most popular and easy form of communication nationwide, right? So logistically, this is huge. But this is also a really important federal recognition of Willard as a place. And so, as we'll talk about, Willard was systematically destroyed, right? But we can never question that it existed because it's on this map. To tell the story of Willard, we're going to be focusing on 3 of the founding families. They were not the only 3. But because of what we found in the archive, we're focusing on the Baileys, the Terrells, and the Newmans. Yeah, so to start.
Hold on, sorry.
Yeah, sorry.
Sorry, the screen on the Zoom is not
not
talking to this one.
Okay.
So I'm going to do some quick technical.
Great.
I
Thank you. No,
apologize.
you're saving the day.
Take a look, Greg.
Yeah, you guys just chill out, take some water, while I fix the thing. Mhm. You guys are doing great. As I try and figure this out. Sure. Hi, guys. Hi. Okay.
Oh, it's the advance, is it on the thing?
You see if that works?
Yeah, it's on there.
It's on there. Okay, good. Thank you, everyone.
Okay.
And continue.
Great. Okay. So before we jump right into the families. Okay. We can,
You gotta click on it and then.
okay, great. Yeah, before we jump right into families, this, I'm kind of going to give you a little bit of the lay of the land, right? So this building here is what the post office was that we just saw on the map. It was also a store, and then we'll see that that place changed again another time. But it's right here at this intersection, which is important because you can see Willard White School is right over here to the east, and then Shiloh Baptist Church, and many of the African-American residents lived right to the west. So this space was right in the middle of these two communities. And it was also an important route for people who would leave the community for jobs and things like that. This is that third change that I was telling you about. And then by the 1950s, this building became the family home of Richard and Margaret Bailey. And this is where they lived with their family until Willard was dissolved by the federal government. Also, right down the road, Richard Bailey's brother, James, founded Shiloh Baptist Church. This was just a half mile down the road where the arrow was pointing. This church served the community spiritually, and then also for a time was a school for the African-American children living in the area. As we transition to talk about these other families, we'll see that together, living in this small town on shared streets and sometimes even within the same household, they were the core with others of the Willard community. They were responsible for building it, navigating politics, inheritance law, property rights, all of those kinds of things, as they created success and legacy for their descendants. This is the Terrell family home, and if you remember, just right across the street is the post office and also the home of Richard and Margaret Bailey, right? So they are neighbors across the street. They owned over 20 acres, and they ended up having 10 children together that they raised here. When Richard passed, he left this tract to Sally and their 9 living children. All right, and then with that, she understood the importance of inheritance law and the fact that if left untouched, right, it was possible that her kids would have to wait a long time in order to get land, or maybe that opportunity would not even be given to them. It was a precarious process that they may lose claim to their ancestral land, right? And so knowing this, she kept this 10-acre plot on the very far right, that you can see the bigger piece, for herself. And then she went to the courthouse and sold 1.4-acre pieces of it. They sliced it up to each of her children and their spouses if they were married. And so they used this low price strategy. She sold an acre of land for $10, right? And so though $10 is more today, right, and than it was in the 50s, this signals that this was just a formality, right? They're just doing this as an exchange amongst family members and making it official throughout the courts or through the courts so that it could never be taken away. The Newmans, though they didn't split property in the same exact way, they used another strategy where they were also doing low price land sales amongst each other. The Newmans, it's also important to talk about, had been free landowners in this area since the 1830s. And a lot of these people or all of them, were continuing this legacy that had been set out for them by their ancestor. They, in 1955, just to give an example, right, Isaiah Earl Newman bought, similar to the Terrells, 1.16 acres from his relative, Richard Newman, for $10. And what's even more fascinating about that is that 1.16 acres was part of a 59-acre property that had been bought 50 years before that from a former enslaver. So they are taking this land that had meant something completely different, right? And turning it into, I'm setting my kids up for the future. It's also down here, this plot, the smaller one in the middle. This is where Stetson Clay and Rosa Willie Newman bought a small parcel of land from their relatives, Earl and Lillian Bailey. So here's the first time we see these names intersecting as well. Happened a lot. It's right by where Shiloh Baptist Church was and their other family members. Stetson and Rosa lived next door to Rosa's sister, Braydell, who was married to Sherman Jett, and they lived there with their families. And as we know, Louis Jett is one of the folks who is dedicating his life to preserving and telling the story still today. Now we're going to zoom in even further, right? So we've been talking about families, which is more zoomed in on than geography is, but we're zooming in even more to tell a more personal story. This is Warren Newman. Some of you might know him or even be related to him. He has an oral history here at Balch that we're going to be using. He was born in 1938, but to his parents, Welford and Mary. They were cousins of Stetson and Rosa. And he actually lived with his grandparents and some maternal relatives who were Baileys, right? And here on this census record, you can see that. You have Newmans, Jetts that we just talked about, Baileys, Newmans, Terrells, all on the same street, right? This is the neighborhood. And then we'll go ahead and play for you something that he had to say about that. Oh no. Is it gonna? No. Okay. Well, it'll be available. Okay. The quote, yeah. So what he says in this oral history clip is that living in this place called Willard, they were all like family. He lived with his mother and her sisters and all of them. And he talks about how they used to play as kids, and his mom traveled for work and she would come home and they would collect cans and do all these. He talks about their lives and how these were the good days is what he calls it. And it's really special. Here, I'll also summarize the quote. When he was 8 years old, he started going to school. And the closest school to him at the time was Florissant Elementary, which is in Fairfax County, not Loudoun. So he wasn't really supposed to go there, right? But rather than finding transportation so far away, this is what the family decided, right? So at 8 years old, he made this 3-mile trip on foot, one way, every single day, back and forth, until Loudoun County found out that this is what was happening and said, I'm so sorry, go to a different school that's really far away from your home, which ended up being Conklin Co-ed School. This was 15 miles from his home. Luckily for him, in 1948, when he first started here, Loudoun County provided bus transportation for the school for the first time. Everyone before had either had to walk or hope that their parents had a vehicle or do something or not go to school, right? Because it was so inaccessible. He was able to take a bus and he went with his 2 brothers, Paul and Elder Carroll. There were also some other Newman children who attended, who may be cousins or other relatives, but this was the option for him in terms of schooling. There was a high level of parent involvement, which is a theme across these 2 communities as well, in education. So the Countywide League was an organization built by the African American PTA clubs of Loudoun County. They combined and used their resources, also connecting with the NAACP, to advocate for their children's education. 2 hot topics for them were quality education in terms of like teachers and availability and all of that kind of stuff, but also bus transportation, which is why he had it in the first place. Conklin specifically, we can see the parent involvement through these 2 petitions that we've highlighted here. Both of these are signed by his parents, and you can see some of his aunts and uncles and other people that he's related to. This one on the left, they are asking that the bus driver, Leroy Allen, who happens to be his cousin, be retained because they feel their children are safe with him. And the one on the right is more about educational quality and all of those things. And then
Yeah, you can stay right here. Okay. All right, so as Annabelle mentioned already, as the Black families across Loudoun really are fighting for equitable education for their children, what's happening in the backdrop is the US government is looking for a location to site the next airport. This article is from the Times Mirror, and basically what it's telling us is that at the beginning of January, they're waiting on President Eisenhower to make a decision about where it's going to be sited. In the early 50s, it was originally supposed to be sited in Burke. Community pushed back, lots of congressional testimony about that. And so Congress actually appropriated $12 million to expedite the process. And when Eisenhower made his decision so that they could basically execute immediately. As you can see in this article, the Loudoun County Board of Supervisors opposed the airport if it was only going to be 70% located in Loudoun and the other 30% in Fairfax County. Instead, they wanted the entire airport sited in Loudoun to bring taxable income. All right. And so this is January 15th. So just fast forward, not even 2 weeks. The Washington Post actually does an article on some of the local residents. You can see that no Black voices are actually cited here, but they are asking, basically how the community feels about this new airport being sited in Chantilly. And 2 quotes here: George Harrison, who owned 80 acres of land, thought that the airport would be good for the community. And an owner of Byrne Furniture, I think is how that's said, also was in favor of the airport because he knew that it would double the value of land. So also there was another article that's not listed up here from the Mirror that reported an immediate increase in property values as soon as the news was announced. In Herndon in particular, there was a property that was going for $125 per acre, and it sold for $750 per acre just because of this announcement, which was a 600% increase. So the new airport actually drove a lot of infrastructure upgrades, as you can imagine, that would benefit the remaining residents of the area. But comparatively, the Black families of Willard were denied those benefits. They were simultaneously, denied their community, and then they weren't also able to reap the benefits of generational wealth. All right, so here is, we're looking at an appraisal. And on the left-hand side, we're looking at an appraisal that was done for families in Willard. And on the right-hand side, it is the actual payout is what we're looking at, okay? So many people are familiar with Sully Plantation that sits on Route 28. So at the time of this expansive kind of government land grab, Sully Plantation was actually part of that original purchase by the government. However, and I don't know if you all can see it in the back, if you look at the left-hand side, Calvin Newman owned 30 acres of land that were appraised for $6,000. On the right-hand side, this is the payout for a gentleman named Frederick Nolte, who owned Sully Plantation, a private owner of Sully at the time. He also worked for the State Department. Actually wasn't living in the house at the time either. He was overseas doing work, but he had close to 30 acres. So 38 acres there also listed, and his compensation was $56,850. Huge disparity for pretty much the same size parcel of land. And so what we understand about this is the opacity of the appraisal process was intentionally to be able to deny these Black property owners kind of what their land was worth. A number of Willard residents actually, after this process kind of took hold, moved south to Conklin, which is just south of 50 and south of Dulles, and built new homes and started new lives. Warren, that Annabelle has told us about, actually had met his wife prior to this process, and they married and went on to have a family and build more community very close by in Sterling, and trying to recreate, if you will, kind of that intergenerational connected community that he had come from. So, what we can understand, right, about Willard is that, both the Board of Supervisors and the local residents were correct. Like the placing of Dulles in Loudoun County would reap many benefits for landowners that were still here presently. It is part of the reason that Loudoun County is the richest county in the nation now. However, what we also know is that that was on the backs or the exploitation, basically, of this Black community, and that was what allowed this to actually occur. And so, again, Willard is no longer with us. But as we transition to the village of St. Louis, it's even more important now that we tell these stories because St. Louis is still here. So to talk about St. Louis, we first, kind of want to look at some of the mythology, if you will, around Middleburg. A lot of people are familiar with Middleburg because of the equestrian culture, but also because of the money that is associated with that particular area. The equestrian culture in particular, even though people talk about, these horses and this culture in in St. Louis, what's often left out is the expertise of the Black community and how they allowed this culture to actually exist. Some of the families that originally, bought land in St. Louis were the Berrymans, the Howards, the Stiles, and the McQuays. And they created, again, an interconnected community, much like Willard. The community centered around its school and church and local store on Snake Hill Road. And we'll get into that. All right, so this is an image of the McQuay store. It was the only storefront in St. Louis. And the McQuays actually continue to be a prominent part of this community. It was the cornerstone of the town in the sense that, yes, it was the store, but it also served as a dance hall and a church and a one-room schoolhouse. And so they used this space, right, to serve many needs in their community, which was amazing. And right across the street is Mount Zion Baptist Church. Mount Zion was founded in 1885, and it served again as a auditorium, if you will, for some of the students that went to school at the McQuay store across the street. Today, Mount Zion hosts homecoming, spiritual revivals, rally days, Howard Days events, and they center the community with lots of fellowship and good food. And they have a celebration called the Howard Day, if I'm not mistaken, which is like a family reunion type style of coming together to fundraise for the church. Was initiated in 1975 by the Haley family and was only thwarted recently due to the COVID pandemic. But the Howards and many other St. Louis families continue to invest in this community right now to keep its ability to exist and pushing back against development that would dispossess Black families that have been there for generations. Yeah. So next we're going to look at the Hamlin School or the St. Louis School, depending upon, so the Hamlin School was built in 1940, or this image is actually from 1940, built in 1877. Again, it was the only school that serviced St. Louis, Black population. If you lived in St. Louis prior to 1948, you went to school at this Hamlin School. Hamlin provided education up to the seventh grade. It's okay. Up to the seventh grade. McQuay store actually acted as a supplement to the Hamlin School because of overcrowding. And so it was common for like the younger children, the younger grades to actually be housed in the McQuay store. In the 1940s, the Loudoun County Training Center, which is here in Leesburg, or was here in Leesburg, was used to facilitate education for Loudoun's Black students that were going to high school. So I told you Hamlin only went up to the seventh grade. So it wasn't uncommon for children to graduate from Hamlin, and if they didn't have transportation, because there were no buses at the time, that could have prevented them from continuing to attend school. Parents in the countywide league, as Annabelle mentioned, petitioned and eventually got Douglas High School opened here locally, and also eventually got transportation from St. Louis up to Douglas. All right, and Banneker Elementary, beloved Banneker, was built in 1948, and it was a solution to the overcrowding that we saw in Hamlin. The school still goes up to the seventh grade, and it's a 6-room schoolhouse, and now children at this point are able to bus from St. Louis to Leesburg to attend Douglas, but that was an hour bus ride just to go to school, hour one way. Okay, so this is an image of a student role at Banneker, and we use this example just to show or just to display that the residents of St. Louis had an abundance of different skill sets, right? They had invaluable expertise, and it was only really these afterlives of slavery that limited their ability to do other things. Continue. And so many of the Black men in the area worked as grooms in this equestrian culture, and many of the Black women, if they were working outside of the home, were actually doing domestic work. And so at the turn of the century, 90% of Black women were actually doing domestic work if they worked outside of the home. And we saw that decline to about 20% after the 1970s and the civil rights movement. But domestic work, as we know, was precarious. It was precarious work, and Black women spent long hours, cooking, cleaning, laundering in the homes of the white community. In St. Louis, many of the job openings were by word of mouth, which also came with that word of mouth about the job was also the reputation of the employer. And so since it wasn't uncommon for mothers and daughters to be performing domestic work at the same time, a lot of the elders shepherded these younger women into these jobs to show them or to teach them the things that they might expect when they're working in these white homes. This is just an image from the Middleburg Museum of some beautifully dressed Black women. And if anyone knows who they might be, we would love to hear from you. Okay. And so courtesy of Sharon Basil, I think that's the right pronunciation. This is a image of her family. So Sharon actually comes from, she's actually the third generation in her family to reside on Foxcroft. And Foxcroft is a private girls' boarding school. Her maternal grandmother, as well as her mother, performed domestic work on Foxcroft. And so Sharon, born in Middleburg in 1951, moved on Foxcroft when she was 9 years old. She attended Banneker Elementary and fondly remembered her first grade teacher, Miss Rosa Carter. I'm sure some of you know her. And some of her sentiments were that she smelled good and she had the most beautiful smile. After graduating from Banneker, she attended Loudoun County High School to be close to her brother, who was actually playing football there. But Marguerite Basil, Sharon's mother, is who I want to talk about here. And she worked as a domestic in the headmaster's home. She worked half days there. And I think it's of note is that she worked half days so that she could still care for and run her own household. So she provided breakfast and dinner for her family. She was there to see her children off to school and see them when they came home from school. And so despite being pulled away, you can see that through this imagery, right, that she had a lot of care for her children. And so her mother's job, Marguerite's job allowed her to help Sharon actually get a job. She worked for the headmaster doing administrative duties in the 11th grade. And she also did some babysitting for some of the teachers on Foxcroft. And her mother, again, supported her in these efforts. But Marguerite's labor and support really acted as a springboard for Sharon's future. She, through her relationship with the headmaster, was able to secure the financial aid that Sharon would need to attend college. She went to Radford University, and she was one of the first 6 Black students to integrate that school. And then she actually, after graduating, she graduated debt-free, let's say that. And then she went on to be a teacher and administrator in Loudoun County Public Schools, which I think is very important. But working alongside Marguerite is Sharon's father and Marguerite's husband, Mr. Edward Basil. And Edward was a groom on Foxcroft. He had been a groom since he was 19 years old. He worked at Foxcroft until 1994 when he retired at the age of 72. And just thinking about that, that's a culmination of over 50 years of expertise in this industry, right? That retired with Edward. And I should say he retired as head groom. Head groom, not just a groom, head groom. All right, so this is a photo also courtesy of Ms. Sharon of Eli Summers. And Eli is Edward's grandfather and Sharon's great-grandfather, who also worked as a groom. But Eli had many talents, much like most of this community. He was a businessman skilled at carpentry. He was a craftsman, a planter. He sold vegetables and other goods like fertilizer, grass seed, meat, corn, shucks, and hay to Black and white neighbors. And simultaneously, he earned money building fences and repairing things in the local community. But what's most important about Eli is that he was a writer. And so he kept these very beautifully specific journals about his daily living. And he made entries about the work that he performed, the people in his community that maybe married or passed away, social encounters, world events, scriptures, prayers, and even his dreams. This image that you're looking at right here is from 1918, and I'll just kind of transcribe or tell you what it says, but it says Mr. Freeland Walker on Old Soldiers' Day at a camp meeting basically paid him $30 and a promise of more work for each additional Soldier's Day. But then he goes on at the bottom to say Mr. Walker was General Lee's cook and drove his baggage wagon, and his age at the time was 97 years old, and this was in 1918, right? And so Eli's ledger, and this is the point, right? Eli's ledger is the reason that we know that he was a groom. It's the only reason that we know that he was a groom. And, him, his grandson, and many other Black men in this region had this expertise, but continued to go uncredited.
So on that note, I am going to continue talking about that idea. This is Basil Turner. He was formerly enslaved at Oatlands, and then notably when the children inherited the plantation following emancipation, he then returned for employment, right? So he continued to be employed there as a gardener for the rest of his life. And this is where we're talking about utilizing these spaces for your own gain, right? He was able to turn this into a financial relationship that he was then able to go and buy 5 acres of land. And that's where he raised his children with his wife, Frances Day, who had also been enslaved at Oatlands. And so this is exactly the type of placemaking that we're talking about, specifically with Black men and Black women in this agricultural field. And so what's really amazing about these photographs is that the one on the right is part of Oatland's digital exhibit about Basil Turner. But this one on the left is from the Smithsonian American Garden digital collection, and it leaves him unnamed. It says gardener. And so I found this and I was like, oh my gosh, it's someone who worked at Oatlands. And Shemika said, I know who that is. And so she had seen this photo and was able to identify him. And so as we're going to see in these next few slides, that's a pattern, right? This anonymity of people was done intentionally, and it's still done intentionally because the metadata, the information that is saved about something is sometimes not curious about identity and naming and all of those kinds of things. So again, as we see some nameless people going forward, take note if you go, that's my grandfather or something like that, because we are always looking to learn from you. Here is another example of that from the same collection. The title of this photo in the archive is Old Gardener, Miss Kyle. So it says that this little girl is Miss Kyle, and this image, super interesting, right? We analyzed that a little bit more story map. But in addition to the title saying Miss Kyle, there's actually 3 additional names listed on the website now that's like, maybe that's who she really is, right? But there's no kind of investigation about this man's identity, right? And so he is a gardener at Foxcroft instead of Oatlands. And so we can kind of situate him with the story that we do know about Sharon Basil. And in this quote, or in this oral history clip, she talks about her father that Shemika mentioned, who was a groom at Foxcroft. And so she talks about her memories of him, seeing him every day before she went to school. And again, on the smells, every time she smells horse manure and leather and all of these kinds of things, she says it makes her feel like home because that's what her dad smelled like, right? And so, yeah, we can imagine that it's possible that this man also lived at Foxcroft, right? We don't know that, but we can ask that question. And that at least gives us a little bit more of a lens into what his life would have been like until we were able to find out who he is. Here are some more examples. These are at the Library of Virginia Photographic Archives. On the left, this is the title of the photo, right? Unidentified man with Mrs. D.N. Lee's stallion broken glass. So we have a photo of the full man. We can figure out who he is, right? But we don't have a name. In fact, we do have a name of the owner of the horse and the horse itself, right? We know who the horse is. And on the right, it gets even better. Unidentified man with DC Sands, $100,000 stallion playfellow. So we know the name of the horse owner, the name of the horse, the price of the horse, right? And so this also brings into question, how much are these men being paid? If this is a $100,000 horse, and they are the only person trusted with their care, are they being paid equitably? I don't know. So this, especially Ben's Farms, which is DC Sands Farm, that was a large employer in the area. We also had some oral histories of folks who were employed there as well. But yeah, this anonymity is what we are trying to intervene with, right? And so we're trying to make those connections like Shemika did with the Turners, with as many people as we possibly can. As many of you might know, one of the most famous equestrian families in Middleburg, St. Louis area was the Kennedys, who employed quite a few grooms and equestrian professionals from this area who were more than likely residents of St. Louis. And so even in this photo, his face is turned away from the camera, right? But that is a Black man. That is a groom who was employed, again, on this very prestigious place. His expertise was highly valued. You can see here, he's between Jackie Kennedy and the president of Pakistan, who was here on a visit. In the story map, we also found a home movie from the Kennedys' other property that has a man in it who's helping with the horses. It might be this man, it might be someone else that we're looking to identify. But these people were highly integrated into these spaces, and yet that is not shared. Their legacy is not well known in every community. It's well known by their descendants. This is an example of how equestrian culture was more than employment, right? They didn't just work for white people. This was also leisure and another form of skill set, right? There are several Black jockeys that came out of St. Louis that did very well. This is from the Balch's collection. A boy, he was young, he was like 11 when this was taken. He won his 7th race at Rockingham Park in New Hampshire. His name was Clarence Reed. And so we don't know who trained him, but his son was trained by a horse trainer named Mac Todd Miller, who was a famous horse trainer employed by the Millens. That's another big family in this area. We know that there was a horse and colt show in St. Louis that was started after African-American people were banned from competing in the Upperville Horse and Colt Show. So that tells us that they were at some point allowed to, right? And then in the 1890s, they cut that off. So St. Louis started and created their own space for that. And this horse and colt show also doesn't stand alone. We know that there are some in Manassas and in Percival and all over this county, that St. Louis is a part of this broader community. And this is yet another aspect of agricultural impact and meaning in the community, because more than working with horses, more than being employed as gardeners, a lot of folks in this area had farmland themselves. And the Lee family, who is up here, is a perfect example of that. Gladys and Lawrence Lee, they were both principals of Banneker Elementary. Lawrence was principal from 1958 to 1959, and Gladys was principal from 59 to 64. They started this successful dairy farm, which these beautiful pictures exemplify. They named the farm after their daughter here on the horse, named Alta Lee. It was called Alta Lee Dairy. And this is the real kicker, right? Before following in her parents' footsteps and becoming a teacher herself, she actually married John Robert Newman, who was a direct descendant of the Willard. Yeah. All right.
So that concludes our presentation, but we do want to say some special thanks. And we want to speak their names. We're open to correction if we get them wrong. But Sharon Basil, is it Chauncia Collins, Christelle Hughes, Mary Howard, Louis Jett, Sharon Smith Peterson, Barbara Scott, Patricia Baltimore Sims, Reverend William Franklin Swan, Miss Laverne Trudy Warner, Sarah Washington, and then the community. The community at large. We know that this body of research has been generously shared with us by the community, and we are thankful that you all allowed us to be part of your family or know your family in this way. We also want to acknowledge our collaborators, co-conspirators, the Thomas Balch Library staff, and we spend a lot of time in here. The Loudoun Black History Committee, Ms. Bohannon, and the Loudoun County Clerk of Court, the Historic Records and Deeds Research, and then, of course, our compatriots and our mentors and leaders at the Mason Legacies. Now, yes, ma'am.
Going back to the Sharon Basil story, Was it 3 children that she had that graduated from Radford debt free?
No, Sharon graduated from Radford,
Sorry.
debt free. She was the third generation in her family that lived on Foxcroft. That was the 3.
I'm just curious, since 3 of our 4 graduated from Radford debt free.
Mhm.
Was it because they got scholarships? Did they pay tuition? What was tuition at the time? I'm just curious.
Yeah, I don't know. She didn't give specifics.
Okay.
Yeah, on that. We just know that she graduated debt free.
Congratulations.
Wait a minute. Yes. So this is the QR code for our story map. I told Dr. Oberle, I was like, if my mom was watching this, she'd be like, what is that jigsaw puzzle on the screen? But so if you have your phone, you can use the camera to take a picture, and it'll take you to our larger narrative and much more extensive research, more imagery and oral histories and citations. Yes, absolutely, citations. And so just to close and open up for questions.
They're going to go back.
Oh, go back. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Yeah. So just to close, again, we just wanted to reiterate, how much we believe this research matters. Our research, of course, is like any research, is ongoing. We would love to learn from you. So if anything you saw in this presentation or things that if you are willing to share, we are open to learn. And if you would like to cite this presentation, we also have a slide for that.
Everybody's trying to get.
Yeah.
Is it working?
This is the.
Yeah, is it working? Okay.
Okay. The elders.
Yeah, understood. I know.
Was there a place to contact? Where do we have that?
It's-
It's on the next slide. Okay.
The, or how we can, I don't know.
We can give our emails.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We can send it out. The
Okay.
email to the
Yeah.
registrations. If you register with Thomas Balch
There's
Library,
that.
That'd be great.
And we'll give our emails and reach out to us if they have feedback.
So in case you didn't hear that, if this information, the QR code and the website will be sent to you via.
Balch Lib. So via Thomas Balch Library, we'll send, if you registered with us, we'll send it through to your email.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
If you register with us, you can leave your email back here.
Yeah, or pass it to Laura.
All right, you want to go to your last slide?
That was it.
That's,
So there's the citation.
that's what we got.
Any questions? Are we?
Yeah, so we got quite a few.
All right, we'll do a pause.
Oh, yeah.
Before you go to the questions, I don't think you knew that we did want to give a little space for Mr. Lewis Jeff. So Lewis, would you like to say a few words?
Sure.
Could I get just a little space up here, please? I appreciate it so much. Good afternoon. How's everybody doing this evening?
Excellent.
Okay. Before I start, I have a binder, this is my collection of articles from the 1950 newspapers that were all that we could find back in the day on Dulles Airport, Dulles Airport, but then it wasn't Dulles Airport, it was Chantilly Airport, okay? And I would like to start by giving it to this young lady here, and you may find some articles in there that you might want to incorporate into your your history. I've got quite a bit of information on Willard, but and I'm working on the longer version, but today I'm gonna give you just a shorter version, okay? And one day it'll probably be on video like they presented here. Okay, my name is Louis Jett, and I was born February the 25th, 1950. And my place of birth was Sterling, Virginia. I was born in the village of Willard. By its population, Willard was a Black community. Now, my father was born in Rappahannock County, Virginia, in the town of Amosville, and he migrated to Baltimore, Maryland, and his final destination was Willard, Virginia. Now, my mother was born in Hillsborough, Virginia, and her maiden name was Lucas, Lucas, and she grew up and lived in the Ashburn area. She met and married my father. Now, my mother was my father's second wife. His first wife was Raydell Harris Jett. She was born in Willard. They had 5 children, 5 girls. I have 5 sisters.
So lucky.
But their mother, she died in 1949, okay, at a young age. And when I was a kid, we grew up in an old house in Willard. When my mother entered the picture with my brother and sisters, the house was not big enough to accommodate 2 families. So with 4 of my sisters being teenagers, they did not want no outsider trying to take the place of their mother, okay? Telling them what they can and cannot do. Okay. This house that we lived in was rented from a Black man, which was unheard of at the time to own land in the village of Willard. As they say, to make a long story short, my sisters, by my father's first wife, did not like my mother. I don't think I have to explain the word jealousy. I don't know, to me, females take the word jealousy to a whole new different level. It didn't take long for my father to see that this was not going to work. Okay. My father purchased some land in Willard, about a half a mile from where we lived, from another Black man named Earl Bailey. At that time, he was working in Clarendon, which is Arlington, for a company called Joyce Motors. The owner of the automobile dealership was Buddy Joyce. He loaned my father the money to have a new house built. Payments on the loan was withheld from his salary every week. So quite some time had passed, and he was curious about how much he still owed on his loan. When he went to the accounting office, found out that the loan had been paid off, but they were still withholding payments from his check. He quit. Now, since I was old enough to remember, my father was never called by his real name, Sherman. He was called Hustler. He worked for himself, hauling junk and doing whatever he could to make ends meet to raise his family. He had a large outdoor dance floor built. And he held dances and parties. He held crap games. He bootlegged. In other words, he sold whiskey, okay?
That's good.
And he did things legal and illegal to take care of his family. Along with that came a lot of other stuff. Now, my journey through Willard, I got a lot here and I got to redo it again, but I don't want to go through all of this today. I just want to highlight some of it, okay? And I promise you, you're going to get the whole story. And I don't see why I can't put it on video, okay? My journey was rather short, so I visited a friend of mine who currently lived on Evergreen Mills Road, about 5 miles south of Leesburg. His name was Albert Smith. He was called by his nickname, Sugar. He was born and raised in the Black community of Willard. I would say if he was living today, he would probably be 85 years old, okay? Yeah. I want to go back and tell you where the name of Willard came from. It was named after a Fairfax politician named Joseph Edward Willard. If you're wondering why Loudoun County Village was named for a Fairfax politician, Willard's main intersection was 1,500 feet from the Fairfax County line. Joseph Edward Willard was a Fairfax County delegate to the Virginia General Assembly from 1893 to 1901. Willard was considered to be one of Virginia's richest men. He had a 14-bedroom house and on a 50-acre estate in the town of Fairfax. Near the Willard Crossroads were small family spreads of former slaves and their descendants. Nathan Corn, Joe Johnson, Joe Holmes, Charles Newman, Lafayette Robinson, Henry Robinson, Eldridge Smith, Arthur Smith. Okay, back to my journey. I was not born in a hospital. My father's first wife, her mother was a midwife. She delivered me. I was born in Willard. Now, I don't remember that, but that's what my mother, that's what my mother told me, okay? One of my earliest memories of Willard as a child was running. I wanted to race everybody that thought they were fast. From my memory, I never lost. Another memory that lingers with me is not such a good one. And when I was in the second grade, my first 2 years, I went to Oak Grove Elementary, which is in Oak Grove. I'd say it's maybe 2 miles from Herndon, okay? And later they found out after they built the school, that half the school was in Loudoun County and the other half was in Fairfax County, okay? And this was a Black elementary school that opened in 1948. My second grade teacher was Mrs. Bryant. I am being very conservative with this number. I got beat at least 50 times during my second grade year. She had a small round stool that I had to lay across in the back area. And she took out that long, thick yardstick. And hey, I gotta tell it like it is. She tore my ass, okay? And this happened almost every day and sometimes more than once a day. But for some reason, I never did tell my parents anything about it, you know? So,
Mr. Jack,
yes, go
do
ahead.
you think you could tell us, wrap it up in maybe about 2 minutes?
I sure will, okay.
We'll probably have a lot of questions.
Some
Questions for you.
Okay,
Okay,
okay.
thank you.
Let me try to skip some of this if I can.
That's great.
To make a long story short, make a long story short, I thought I was a pretty good student and I learned, but guess what? She flunked me. And I couldn't believe that, okay? So after the airport came in 1958, my parents, my mother, she didn't want to go to Manassas where all the other residents went because she thought it was just too crazy over there. So she moved all us back to Hillsborough. Okay. Let me see if I can skip real quick.
Maybe your final memory of Willard?
I'm not here to use foul language, but I have to tell things the way they are, okay? And as a kid, I was a badass, okay? My father let me get away with too much, okay? For whatever reason, if I didn't get my way, I would hit my older sisters and run. I hid behind my father. This is when I should have gotten my behind whipped. Okay, so I was kind of spoiled. Let me go get to the end. Okay, I can remember riding in a 1939 Dodge truck with my father hauling junk to a junkyard in Georgetown, in DC, okay? And he would ask if I would give him the directions to and from Georgetown. And it was like I was working my mind. Okay. Okay, I'm gonna conclude with that for Chantilly, because after that, when the airport came in, which I have so much history on, okay? And we had to move, but the memory that's clear in my mind about Willard was before we moved, my father, he didn't want to move. He didn't want to go to Hillsborough. But the big earth movers, what we call youths, would be coming through our yard, knocking down trees, grading, and taking down everything, okay? So we finally moved, but I have something I'm gonna do with the MWAA, Metropolitan Washington Airport Authority. And I'm gonna let them know real soon what it's gonna be, okay? So I want to thank y'all for
Can I get a note? Before the questions start, because I know they'll be like, I'm Al Van Hyke, and I'm here today to let everybody know that we have formed the Loudoun Cemetery Conservancy. Wynn Sattler and Lori Kimmel and others who are familiar with it, and Don. But we're very interested in the African-American cemeteries. And we had this wonderful presentation, and it would be interesting to know where all those interesting people are buried. And that's going to be the task. We formed it. We've got significant startup money. And I'm here for two reasons, and I'll be out of here. You're not gonna hear about my history. And I just wanted to say, if there's one of the things we're doing now, right now, and it's important, is trying to identify living persons who are familiar with the African-American cemeteries, because we want to have a personal link, because the program we're going to offer is professional grant money to experts in grave replacement, landscaping, and all things go into it, to work with volunteers in that cemetery to bring them back. That's our program. We're going to do some training and other things, but we're looking right now for somebody who would like to join us and take on the task of helping us find, going through the list of about 15 or 20 African-American cemeteries and find out who is interested in them right now, so that we have a contact and can begin to prepare a program. So if anybody's interested, I just happen to have a brochure in my hand, and I'll be in the back of the room when this is over. And if anybody's interested in working with us, and of course, I'm going to go and put the pressure on Donna. So this is a small fact. It's the first time Donna and I have been in the same room, this room, since 2018, when we both got the Balch Award. So we've been friends ever since. Anyway, this will be a great sub-project, I hope, for the Black History Committee. We've got the money, we've got the talent, we've got the time, and we've got the dedication, and we need just cooperation. Thank you.
I want to say one more thing. About 35 years ago, could be 40, when I started my Black history collection, I went to every Black cemetery that I could find in Loudoun County. And I documented everybody that was in those cemeteries. But I haven't gotten with Mr. Van Hyke or anybody, okay? And I just have the history of the Black cemeteries, okay? And if anybody, I'm gonna have them, I've been procrastinating for a long time, okay? But soon I'm gonna have all this information online so everyone can view it.
Excellent.
Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you all for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you. He is such a wonderful local.
Font of information, yes.
And I think that.
Questions?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna try to, do you wanna give like maybe a couple together, maybe we can
Yeah, no, I
synthesize them?
can get that here. So first one is about Willard and the appraisals that were presented. So the question is, how was it legal to pay white residents so much more for their land than the Black residents for Dulles? I recognize it's likely because of systemic racism, but it's just so overt. So why, can you explain a little bit of the background on that?
Absolutely. So going through the appraisals and also some of the correspondence from the appraisers, the Department of Interior, and some of the other agents that were working, insurance companies, people that were verifying deeds. What was missing was their process. And so, you know, they would often get together and kind of value land, make lists of what they thought the land was worth or the homes were worth. But they didn't list things like what was their range of tolerance, if they were, you know, out of range. They never codified a process in writing. And that was, I think, deliberate to allow them to maneuver. We also saw some correspondence that basically said, we're not going to question you about the appraisal numbers that you come back with. And so one of the things that we noticed in the appraisals, some of the white landowners that had just moved to the area, maybe within the last like 5 to 10 years of this happening, that was noted in the appraisals. And so they would put, you know, purchase this land on this date for this amount of money. But when you think about the Newmans that had been there for over 100 years, the appraisals would read things like, the property's only changed hands with family, or, I mean, they just never documented basically how long they had owned this land. And so we believe that was deliberate.
Okay, and then, the Eli Summers, you guys mentioned, there's Allison Heron, she's been doing research and she wants to know whether or not that's the same Eli Summers who lived from 1859 to 1938. And where is that ledger?
Yeah.
So yes, I do believe that's the same one. Those dates check, and that ledger was with his granddaughter.
Oh,
Sharon
okay.
Basil.
That's Sharon Basil. Yeah.
Okay. And then if anyone has any other questions, there's a lot of comments here. So if someone wants to go in the audience, I'll come back.
So, yeah, so first of all, hello, cousin Jet, we'll take it. Yeah, never seen you.
Family reunion.
Our cousin back there, she's our cousin as well, she's a Harris. And so we know that we're related to everybody. So. Just because of the Scully Plantation and our connection there, and with the Carter family and with the Petrie family. So we all related. So first, I want to say thank you so much. You all did a wonderful job, by the way, and I was writing and taking pictures. So you'll see my pictures on the Facebook page. I really enjoyed it. It was a struggle getting here because I went to church and then I wanted to stop and get Wendy's, but I made it.
So glad you did.
Good job.
Thank you.
So good to see you again.
Yes, sir.
All right, I'm ready now.
Okay.
I see the surnames Basil and Newman. Are they related? In the 1830 census in Middleburg was a Basil Newman.
So Basil Newman, when we were saying that the Newmans had been residents and landowners since the 1830s, Basil Newman is who we were talking about. So he owned a boating business where he transported things and perhaps even enslaved people across the Potomac River. There's also a Newman town in Maryland that's like right over from where Willard was and right where he was doing business. And so we have not been able to find that tie, but there are, because there was also Basil Turner. So there's lots of Basils, first names and last names, and yeah, so possibly, it's highly likely, but we don't know for sure. And yes, and one of our colleagues at Mason is actually doing a thesis more focused on Basil Newman. So if that is something that anybody's interested in, we can share that information.
And then final question online. A man named Clarence Reed appears in my research. What were his birth and death years or parents, if you know that information?
So not off the top of my head, but I have it written somewhere, and I actually got it here at Balch. There's a Clarence Reed collection that has a donor note in it that spells out his birth and death dates and some high points of his life.
Nice plug.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very well done. Almost like that section was a play.
Yes.
Was Clarence Reed, he was from Howardville? If I'm not mistaken.
It was somewhere, somebody I was looking at was like born in Bluemont, somewhere. Yeah.
That Howardville.
That is exactly right. Yep.
Because actually, one of his cousins was just back there.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah,
That's
she has a
awesome.
running lead. That's Michael's daughter.
Wow. That's awesome. Wow.
His daughter, she was like, I saw cousin Clarence.
Wow.
And I do want to thank you guys very much. I got the opportunity to meet you two young ladies. You're a wealth of information. I hope to get with you again real soon. This Wednesday, what can I say? I know.
Yeah, the thanks goes to you.
It's definitely the best. And thank you as well.
Yes, ma'am.
I don't have an idea of the size
hanging out with smart
communities, hundreds, 50s.
Oh, the size, like populations
Like
of the
population
communities.
sizes.
Hundreds.
I would, yeah.
Wait, in terms of dispossession, is that the question?
Just
like how many
general
population.
population.
My guess would be that St. Louis is bigger than Willard.
Oh, just Willard.
Willard, no, 100.
Willard hundreds, St. Louis more than that, I would bet.
But
we don't know for
Willard
sure.
100.
Yeah.
I mean, the thing that was stunning when you start looking at the collection, which is still being processed, that's here of the assessment ledgers, is that it was specifically targeting poor people, white and black. And there's a very but there's a clear disadvantage happening to Black people. And it's significant. I mean, the records are completely, once they're available, they're incredibly rich. And the letters that Shemika and Annabelle engaged with tell these incredibly powerful stories of families who don't want to be dispossessed. They say there's nowhere else they can go for the amount that is being given to them. Yet they are being forced out, and those who are able to play the game by understanding the bureaucracy, and these are mostly white people, they are the ones who end up appealing and getting compensated at a higher level.
So no lawsuits got from Black.
There were,
No, not for Black.
not for Black
No.
people, but there were lawsuits and there were congressional testimony.
So if you're interested, you can find online the congressional hearings. There are two. Something like if you Google like congressional hearings, Chantilly Airport, and you have extensive testimony by white Willard residents / businesses. As far as we can tell, no African Americans, which would not be surprising, were given the opportunity to testify about the lack of equitable compensation or the hardship that the move would create for them. Burke, the residents of Burke, got very litigious, and they were prepared to legally sue, do whatever. And so that's why the Burke site went away, and they moved expeditiously so that they didn't provide the residents enough time in Willard to have a legal life.
That was the lesson they learned from.
Go fast, don't go slow.
Go fast.
So all the civic organizations in Fairfax County, especially Burke and all those areas, they joined together and they hammered it home, and they even got their local politicians to resist. Whereas most of the local politicians often were happy to have this investment in these things. But once the voters started coming out and saying, no, then they backed off and attacked the federal government.
I have one question.
Yes, sir.
It's for Shemika, Annabelle, or Wendi.
Okay.
What the heck does spatializing mean?
Spatializing?
Spatializing? Oh, yeah, so it means space. So it's like how Black people in a space.
Okay, I just wanted to know.
Yeah, how they create. Oh, okay, how they create their families and communities, right?
Okay.
Yeah, and leave a legacy and tell their stories, like you were telling stories.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So we have a question over here.
So I was listening to the story. One of the things that stuck out for me was when you talk about families and how the parcels were divvied up. But previous to that, you had said that an enslaver had sold the property to the family. So I'm curious why the enslaver sold it to Black people. Were they part of that plantation? And if they were, how far back?
Right, so that specific example happened, I think, around the turn of the century. So it was not someone, like, he wasn't selling his land during enslavement. This was like after the Emancipation Proclamation. We did find that there was an enslaver who had the last name Bailey, which might suggest that the Bailey family is somehow connected there in their ancestry. But we tried not to go back that far intentionally, just because it was so much for scope reasons, and also we didn't want to make it about slavery, right? We kind of wanted to. So your question is great. I don't have the answer to it. Basically, is what I'm saying. Yeah.
But wasn't Willard part of the 40 acres and a mule area?
Was
at least not for the Newmans, no, because they owned that land before emancipation.
Right, yeah.
Well, this is something here.
Oh my goodness. Hello.
So as far as we can tell, no.
Right.
Yeah.
So we have, okay.
So to follow up on that, Joseph Willard, was named after Joseph Willard. Did he own that property? Why in the heck did they name it after Joseph Willard, who we know was not very pro-African American, but to put it politely?
He, as far as we know, did not own that land.
Was it some of his people that had once lived in Fairfax?
Casey might have an answer.
What's the deal? So there used to be a list that would go out. New post offices would open up and a list of accepted names would go out and his name was on the list. And we likely think that that is why it was chosen because we spent some, we spent some time looking into whether or not there was a travel route, when he was going to visit other properties or something like that. But I really think it was the simplest answer, which was just his name was on the list, it was locally known, and so that's what we chose.
Okay, yeah, because we wrote a book called Black Communities of Fairfax History, and we talk about the Black Cemetery, the Germantown Cemetery, and those people that worked, the African Americans on Willard property are buried there. So I was saying, do we have a group of descendants? So that was not.
I mean, I'm not going to suggest that you don't. I have not done that research, but I can say that it's likely that the name was chosen because of this common.
And we should acknowledge that Casey actually started this research. So she's a teammate of ours for Mason Legacies. And the work that Annabelle and I did was built off of the very solid foundation that she provided.
All makes sense.
A question here, are Willard descendants considering a push for reparations from the county or on a national level?
Well, yeah, well,
So here's what I'll say. What we do as faculty and what we train our students to do is to do research, right? We do the research based on the evidence that they find and the oral stories and the artifacts that we locate or people share with us. What the community decides to do with the evidence, with the research is about, right, that agency. And so we want our work and all of the students' work will be accessible and available to the public. There's no paywall, there's no fee, and they will continue to work on this project. And we hope that the community finds value in it.
And I just want to add, piggyback on what you said about George Mason, Black History Committee, President Thomas Balch Library, the same explanation that we are here to collect and share the stories and make them accessible so that we will all know our history.
And just so you know, Joseph Willard's two children were girls. One married Kermit Roosevelt, who was Theodore Roosevelt's son. The other married the Earl of Kennard's youngest son. So if any of you heard of Downton Abbey, where she married the youngest son. I'm saying the whole family, yes, they are. It has nothing to do with your taxes.
But our ancestors work for them as well.
Yes.
Yes. And one of the things I want to make note of is part of what this story is saying. It's talking about the connections of the different communities. And so we're talking about Loudoun. We're also talking about Dulles Airport, which is in both Loudoun and Fairfax. And we are lucky here in Loudoun. You all can probably tell by our banter that we talk to each other all the time and go back and forth, but also we're very close with the community of Fairfax. And we have this Linnell here who was a descendant of family. And everybody. In Fairfax, where she's doing a lot of work, most of her work, but also here in Loudoun County. And I just wanted to acknowledge another local historian here in the room. Okay.
You taking more questions?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think.
I don't know if you all are looking for another community to look at and study, but I'm with the Lovettsville Historical Society.
Yeah.
And we have you may be familiar, a community called Little Britain, also was known as Guinea.
And there's that was a thriving Black community from right after the Civil War to the 1920s, about which time everybody moved away. A lot of people there moved to Rockland, in Montgomery County, Maryland. But there's a cemetery there which we've been trying to get restored and protected, where there's 12 headstones left. According to neighbors, there are probably about 100 people buried. We are working with Alvan Hike on this. Will be one of his experiments, I guess, pilot projects. And we've done a certain amount of with some family descendants, also trying to determine what happened to the people who lived there. And we have an idea of some of the people who are buried, who they were. Whether it's a Civil War veteran from colored troops. One of the mass meeting, which Don Bohannon has looked at, one of those people, Henry Howard, is there. But we want to know more about the other people there too. So you're invited. Come on out.
Thank you.
What ongoing efforts are happening to share this information with descendants and newer residents?
It's online. Yeah.
Yes.
Actually, show.
Oh, yeah. We can pull up.
So when you use the QR code and you go to, and Story Map, it's a platform that you can use to both visually and textually tell a story. What's nice is it looks like a website, but they can also embed images of documents. They can embed sound clips, and it's something that we can continue to expand and grow. So you can go and you'll be able to scroll through, and you see all the descriptions, information, and the citations of where the various sources are located.
And all the oral history clips are in there.
Yeah.
And then I also want to mention that the Black History Committee, the Willard and the St. Louis story, and then another community. These were people from the community that came and asked for the Black History Committee assistance. And so, we're all volunteers on the Black History Committee. And again, wanting to be intentional and do a good job, we reached out with our partnership with George Mason University. But the other thing we've done is the Black History Committee has worked with the county in order to identify and update a document that identifies the places pertinent to African American history. So, and that's actually online at the county website. So it's a three-pronged process that we do in partnership with different organizations. Yeah. Any other questions?
Yeah, 1 second, sorry. One, is membership open to the Black History Committee group?
Yes.
Yes, and I will, we can include that link into our email, and we'll have that available. And then how is the community being engaged to explore this site?
So I think through multiple avenues. So it will be shared through the Black History Committee, the Thomas Balch site. We will also have a link to the exhibit through Center for Mason Legacies. I believe
Mecca site as well.
Right, another site that will continue to be adding more documents for folks to have access to. I think Quran Sayings is also probably going to have a link to the site as well. We have been engaging with the community almost 4 years now, collecting oral histories and documents, and that will be ongoing. Supporting research in terms of Willard, St. Louis, and also Mount Pleasant. So we are always open to folks who would like to share. What we always tell folks is that whatever you're willing to share, it is not for us. We are simply kind of the holders who are able to then make it accessible to the community in perpetuity. Right, so we really are just a vehicle to ensure that individual stories, family stories, community stories and artifacts are not disappearing.
Yeah, we don't want to phone you.
We are not interested in owning or anything.
This was actually our inauguration. This was the launch of the project. The students and faculty just completed the work. And then actually, the work's not completed.
It's not completed.
But after we had got a grant and the work was done, the most of the work was done during the summer
Yeah.
by the students. And the grant period ended on November 1st.
So
But the work continues.
The work continues. So this is our first launch to let the community know that this information is available.
Donna, I would like to applaud you as well.
Yes.
And so you know how I am. I like to have everybody recognize the Black History Committee members. So you got past and present. So if everybody can, who's a Black History Committee member, please stand up. Any other questions?
Thanks for the great job.
Thanks.
And online. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, my God.